I never thought I'd see the day when I'd have to fight just to live in my own home. But when the HOA decided they had more rights over my property than I did, they left me with no choice. This isn't just a story about a simple homeowner's dispute. This is about how an entire HOA board conspired to take away what was rightfully mine, and how I made them regret every second of it. It all started with a letter. A simple, folded envelope stuffed into my mailbox, marked with the HOA's official seal. At first, I thought it was another useless update about community events, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter, due to ongoing violations and unpaid dues, your property has been deemed abandoned. Per HOA policy, we have exercised our right to reclaim the home for community use. Please vacate the premises within 30 days. Reclaimed the home? I turned to my wife, Olivia, who was sitting across the kitchen table. Her face had gone pale as she read over my shoulder. "They can't do this," she whispered. "This has to be a mistake." But it wasn't. Over the next few days, we scrambled to get answers. Calls to the HOA office went unanswered. Emails bounced back with automated replies. Even when I physically walked to their office, I was met with nothing but cold, bureaucratic stonewalling. "Sir, all inquiries must be submitted in writing," the receptionist droned. "I did that 5 times. Then you'll receive a response within the standard processing time." "And what exactly is that?" I snapped. She barely looked up. 60 to 90 days. 90 days? We had 30 days before we were supposed to be evicted from our own home. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I dug deeper, pulling every single document I could find, HOA agreements, property records, even old emails between us and the board. And the more I read, the worse it got. The violations they accused us of, completely fabricated. The unpaid dues, we had proof of every single payment, dated, signed, and cashed. And the worst part, our house had already been listed for sale. The HOA was trying to steal our home. A luxury real estate company had already put our house on the market while we were still living in it. And the name behind the listing? Gregory Hill, HOA president. That's when everything clicked. This wasn't just a clerical error. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This was a carefully planned scheme. But they had underestimated us. We weren't just going to roll over and leave. We were going to fight back. I had never felt so powerless in my entire life. My home, the place where Olivia and I had built our family, where we raised our 2 kids, where we hosted Sunday dinners, was being stolen from us in plain sight. And the worst part? The people responsible for it were hiding behind legal loopholes and red tape. But if they thought I was just going to sit back and let it happen, they were dead wrong. I started with the money trail. If Gregory Hill, the HOA president, was involved in selling our home behind our backs, then there had to be a financial incentive. And sure enough, the deeper I dug, the dirtier it got. First, I found a real estate listing that had been posted weeks before we even received the eviction notice. It described our house in full detail, down to the color of Olivia's flower beds in the front yard. And right next to the listing agent's name, a brokerage firm connected to Gregory's own company. That's when the rage kicked in. This wasn't just an administrative mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was theft. But what really sent me over the edge was when I looked at other homes in the neighborhood. It had happened before. 4 other houses, belonging to elderly couples, single parents, and people who had missed just one HOA payment, had all mysteriously gone up for sale under similar circumstances. And where were those homeowners now? Gone, displaced. Not a single one still lived in our community. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about my house. Gregory Hill and his cronies had perfected a system where they could legally steal homes from people who were too busy, too old, or too overwhelmed to fight back. But they made one mistake this time. They came after me, and I had nothing left to lose. Step 1, buy time. We had less than 30 days before the HOA claimed our home. I needed to slow them down. So I did what any desperate homeowner would do. I hired the nastiest, most aggressive lawyer I could find. His name was Daniel Novak, and his reputation was terrifying. He was the kind of guy who sued people for fun. The kind of guy who made HOA presidents cry in courtrooms. When I showed him all the documents, the fake violations, the missing payments, the forged sale listings, he leaned back in his chair and laughed. "These idiots are sloppy," he said, flipping through the pages. "They're screwing up the paperwork. If they had half a brain, they'd cover their tracks better." I sat forward. "So you can stop them?" He smirked. "Oh, we're not just stopping them. We're going to drag them through hell." That was exactly what I needed to hear. Step 2, go public. The HOA had done this before and gotten away with it. But if I could make enough noise, maybe we could force them into a corner. So I contacted every single homeowner who had lost their house under suspicious circumstances. Some were too scared to talk. Some had already moved across the country. But one woman, Sarah Whitman, was ready to fight. She had been forced out of her home last year over unpaid fines that she later discovered had already been paid. Sound familiar? I met her at a small diner just outside town. She looked exhausted, like someone who had been through war. "You're fighting them?" she asked, stirring her coffee. I nodded. "Not just for me, for everyone they did this to." Her lips pressed together. "I lost my house, my retirement savings, everything." "I know." I exhaled. "But if we work together, we can stop them before they do it again." She hesitated, then reached into her purse and pulled out a thick folder. "This is everything I have," she said. "Emails, contracts, proof that Gregory faked violations on my property to force me out." I flipped through the pages, my pulse quickening. This was it. The smoking gun. Sarah had actual proof that the HOA wasn't just enforcing rules. They were manufacturing violations to steal homes. And now, I had everything I needed to destroy them. Step 3, confrontation. I wasn't going to wait for the eviction date. I wasn't going to let Gregory hide behind HOA meetings. I was going to force him to answer for his crimes in front of the entire neighborhood. So I waited for the next HOA meeting. These meetings were normally boring, filled with passive-aggressive debates about lawn decorations and mailbox colors. But this time, it was war. I walked into the community center carrying every piece of evidence we had. Sarah was right beside me. So was Daniel Novak. And so were 2 local news reporters I had tipped off about the scandal. As soon as Gregory saw me, his face drained of color, but it was too late. I stood up, cleared my throat, and slammed the folder down on the table. "I think we need to talk about how you're stealing homes from people in this neighborhood." The room went silent. Gregory stammered. "Mr. Carter, this isn't—" I cut him off. "Don't. You've been caught. I have emails. I have proof of forged violations. I have financial statements showing that you've been selling properties behind people's backs." He paled even more. One of the board members, a woman named Linda, shifted uncomfortably. "Gregory, is this true?" Before he could answer, Sarah spoke up. "You stole my house," she said, her voice trembling. "You drained my savings. You ruined my life." Other people in the room started murmuring. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "They tried to do that to my uncle." Gregory shot to his feet. "This is ridiculous. This is an attack on the HOA's integrity." "No," I leaned forward. "This is a reckoning." And just like that, the tide turned. The HOA members who had blindly supported Gregory suddenly didn't want to be associated with him. The news reporters took photos of the documents, documenting every fraud, every theft, every illegal eviction. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any better, Daniel Novak dropped the final bombshell. "Gregory," he said, pulling out another folder, "did you know it's a felony to falsify property records?" Gregory froze, and that's when the police walked in. Gregory's face turned a sickly shade of gray as two uniformed officers walked into the meeting room. The entire HOA board stared in stunned silence. "I'm sorry. What is the meaning of this?" Gregory stammered, gripping the table so hard his knuckles turned white. One of the officers, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a serious expression, stepped forward, pulling out a folder. "Mr. Hill," he said, flipping through the papers, "we have received a formal complaint regarding fraudulent property transactions, falsified violations, and illegal foreclosures conducted under your supervision as HOA president." The room erupted into murmurs. Gregory shot up from his seat. "This is outrageous!" he barked. "I have done nothing illegal. This is all a—" Sarah cut him off. "I lost my house because of you," she said, her voice trembling with rage. "And I have proof." She marched forward and slammed a stack of documents onto the table. Emails, contracts, bank statements, everything tying Gregory to fraudulent home sales and personal financial gain. The officers exchanged glances. "This isn't looking good, Mr. Hill," one of them said. "We're going to need you to come with us for questioning." Gregory's smug mask cracked. His eyes darted from the officers to the board members, then to the reporters scribbling furiously in their notebooks. "Wait, no, this is a misunderstanding," he babbled. "I didn't do anything wrong. The board approved everything. They knew about the foreclosures. They signed off on the sales." Several board members visibly recoiled. Linda, the only board member who had shown hesitation during the meeting, stood up. "I most certainly did not," she said coldly. "I never approved of anything illegal. If you were falsifying documents, you were doing it without our knowledge." Gregory spun toward her. "You knew!" he hissed. "All of you knew. Do you think I made those violation notices by myself? Do you think I handled the foreclosures alone? Don't try to act innocent now." But it was too late. The panic in his voice told me everything I needed to know. He was crumbling. The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Mr. Hill," he said firmly, "please step forward." Gregory backed away, his hands raised. "You can't do this!" he shrieked. "I built this community. I made this neighborhood what it is today." I stepped forward, arms crossed. "No, Gregory," I said, my voice steady. "You stole from this community. You ruined people's lives. You treated their homes like your personal business venture." His eyes darted to me, filled with hate. "You," he spat. "You think you've won? This isn't over. I have lawyers. I have connections. I will make sure you regret this." Daniel Novak, who had been calmly watching everything unfold, finally spoke up. "Gregory," he said, grinning slightly, "I love when people say that." And then, click, the handcuffs snapped shut. Gregory stiffened as the officers turned him around and began leading him toward the door. "I'll sue all of you," he howled. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer." I smirked. "I hope so," I said, "because mine is better." The officers led him out of the room as the entire HOA board sat in shell-shocked silence. Linda, still pale-faced, turned toward me. "Mr. Carter," she said hesitantly, "what happens now?" I exhaled slowly. It wasn't over yet, not even close. Gregory had been the ringleader, but the entire system was corrupt. I wasn't going to stop at just getting him arrested. I wanted to tear down everything he built. So, I made my first move, a motion to dissolve the HOA. Sarah backed me up immediately. "This organization is rotten to the core," she said. "It has done nothing but exploit homeowners. We need to shut it down." I turned to Linda. "You're the vice president," I said. "That makes you the highest-ranking member now. You have the power to bring this to a vote." She hesitated. I don't know," she admitted. "I agree that Gregory was corrupt, but the HOA does serve some functions." Sarah laughed bitterly. "You mean functions like stealing people's homes?" Linda flinched. Then, after a long pause, she nodded. "You're right," she said quietly. "Let's vote." The board members raised their hands one by one, and just like that, the HOA was officially dead. With Gregory out of the picture and the HOA dismantled, there was one last thing to do. Make sure this never happened again. So I took the entire story public. The reporters who had attended the meeting, they published exposés about Gregory's fraudulent activities. Sarah and I worked with Novak to help the homeowners who had been wrongfully evicted. Some of them were even able to get financial compensation. And Gregory? He tried to fight the charges, but with so much evidence against him, he didn't stand a chance. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for fraud and financial misconduct. By the time he got out, our neighborhood wouldn't even look the same. Because now, we were finally free. 1 year later, I stepped onto my front porch, inhaling deeply. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel worried. I felt at peace. The community had transformed since Gregory's downfall. There were no absurd violation fines, no harassment from power-hungry board members, no threats of eviction for minor infractions. People were finally living their lives without fear. Sarah walked up the driveway, smiling. "You ready for the meeting?" she asked. I nodded. Tonight was the first official meeting of our new community association. Not an HOA, not a dictatorship, just neighbors working together, the way it should have always been. I turned to Olivia, who was standing beside me, her hand in mine. "We did it," I murmured. She smiled, squeezing my fingers. We sure did. As we headed down the street, past houses that had once been targets of Gregory's greed, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Because we weren't just homeowners anymore. We were a real community. And no one, not Gregory, not another corrupt HOA, was ever going to take that away from us again. The night was quiet, but my mind was anything but. Even though Gregory was behind bars, even though the HOA was officially dissolved, I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't finished yet. There was still one unanswered question. What happened to all the stolen money? We had proven Gregory had been running a fraudulent scheme, forging violations, and forcing homeowners into foreclosure so he could sell their homes for profit. But we had only traced a small portion of the funds. Where was the rest? The next morning, I met with Daniel Novak, the lawyer who had helped us take Gregory down. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Here's what doesn't add up," he said. According to the financial reports, Gregory was moving money between several accounts, but a lot of it just disappeared. Sarah, who was sitting across from us, frowned. "How much are we talking?" Novak flipped through a thick stack of papers. "Around $3 million. My stomach dropped. "3 million?" I repeated. Novak nodded. That money came from excessive violation fees, illegal foreclosure sales, and fraudulent HOA dues. But when we traced the transfers, we hit a dead end. Sarah exhaled sharply. Where would Gregory even hide that kind of money? I shook my head. I don't know. But if we find it, we could return it to the homeowners he stole from. Novak tapped his pen against the desk. There is one person who might know. I immediately knew who he meant. Linda. She had been Gregory's second-in-command for years. If anyone had insight into his financial secrets, it was her. Linda's house was eerily quiet when we pulled up. The porch lights were off and the curtains were drawn. Sarah and I exchanged glances. Maybe she's not home, Sarah whispered. I hesitated, then knocked. A long pause. Then, footsteps. The door creaked open an inch and Linda's face appeared, pale and tired. What do you want? She asked, her voice weary. I didn't waste time. We know about the missing money, I said. $3 million. Where did Gregory put it? Linda's grip on the door tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Sarah stepped forward. Linda, come on. We know you weren't as deep in this as Gregory was. But if you don't help us, people will assume you were. Linda's jaw clenched. Then, after a long silence, she sighed and opened the door wider. "Come in," she muttered. Linda led us to her dining table, where a laptop sat open. She hesitated before turning the screen toward us. "This is all I know," she said quietly. "Gregory was paranoid. He had multiple offshore accounts, shell companies. He spread the money everywhere." I leaned in. The screen showed a spreadsheet, hundreds of transactions, routing numbers, and cryptic account names. "He used a fake consulting company to funnel most of it," Linda explained. "He said it was for future investments, but I always had a feeling it was just his personal escape fund." Sarah frowned. "Where was he planning to escape to?" Linda hesitated. Then she clicked on another folder. A document appeared on screen, one with Gregory's name on it. It was a real estate purchase in the Cayman Islands. Sarah and I stared. Linda sighed. "He was planning to flee," she murmured. "If he ever got caught, he wanted a place to run to." I exhaled, my mind racing. This was it. We had everything we needed. The next day, I met with Novak and handed over everything Linda had given us. Novak grinned. "You just handed me a case that the feds are going to love." Within a week, federal investigators were digging into Gregory's offshore accounts, and within a month, they had frozen every single one. The stolen money, it was returned to the homeowners he had scammed. The corrupt HOA dismantled for good. Gregory, he wasn't just facing fraud charges anymore. Now he was looking at federal financial crimes, and this time, he wasn't getting out of it. I stood on my porch, watching as my neighbors laughed and chatted in the street. No fear of random fines, no stress about corrupt board members, no threats of losing their homes. Sarah stepped beside me, holding a glass of iced tea. "Feels good, doesn't it?" she murmured. I nodded. We had fought back. We had taken our community back. And now, we were finally free. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt like home again. But something still lingered in the air. Unfinished business. Even though Gregory was locked away, even though his stolen money had been recovered, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't completely over. Because Linda, she had one last secret. It was 2 weeks after the federal charges had been filed. I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up, a sleek black sedan. The window rolled down, and Linda stared at me. Her face was unreadable. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't trust her, but something in her eyes made me listen anyway. Linda sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly. "There's something I didn't tell you," she admitted. Sarah folded her arms. "Figures," she muttered. Linda exhaled. "Gregory, he knew this day might come. He always had a plan." My stomach tensed. "A plan for what?" Linda leaned forward. "To take everything down with him." I stared at her. "What do you mean?" Linda hesitated. Then she pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. Sarah and I exchanged glances before I picked it up. Linda's voice was flat. "You need to see for yourself." That night, I plugged the USB into my laptop. Files popped up instantly. Dozens of documents, videos, and emails. At first, I wasn't sure what I was looking at. But then I opened the first video, and my blood ran cold. The screen showed Gregory, sitting in a boardroom, talking, with someone I never expected to see, the mayor. Then another video, Gregory shaking hands with a bank official. Another. Gregory passing envelopes to a local judge. I clicked through file after file, my hands shaking. Emails between Gregory and city planners, contractors, even police officers. They were all in on it. The entire system was rigged from the start. Gregory wasn't just a fraudulent HOA president. He was the puppet master of an entire corruption ring. I exhaled. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice hushed. I clenched my fists. "We take them all down." But we had to be smart. Gregory might have been in prison, but the people in these videos, They were still out there, and if they knew we had this, we'd be in serious danger. Instead of going straight to the authorities, we did something better. We leaked the files, anonymously, to reporters, to watchdog organizations, to anyone who would expose the truth. And within a week, it was everywhere. The city exploded with backlash. The mayor resigned in disgrace. The judge was removed from the bench. The bank officials were investigated for fraud. Every single person Gregory had worked with fell like dominoes. 2 months later, I stood on the same hill where this all began. The land that Gregory tried to steal. The land that my grandfather fought to protect. Sarah stepped beside me. "What happens now?" she asked. I smiled. "This land stays free," I said. "No more HOAs. No more corruption. Just home. For everyone. For good." I should have known it wouldn't be that easy. Taking down Gregory was one thing. But dismantling the system he built? That was an entirely different battle. A city in chaos. The moment the news broke, everything spiraled out of control. The city was in uproar. Protests outside the mayor's office. Lawsuits stacking up against the corrupt officials. And Gregory? He was still pulling strings, even from behind bars. A cryptic letter. It arrived 3 weeks after the files leaked. An envelope, no return address. Inside, a single handwritten note. "You think this is over? It's not. You started something you can't finish." No signature, but I knew who it was from. Gregory. Even in a cell, he wasn't done. And that meant neither was I. A new threat. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of tires screeching. Sarah and I rushed to the window. A black SUV sped away from our driveway, and in its place, a pile of burning documents. Important documents. Documents that I'd been gathering to build the final case against Gregory's network. Sarah's face went pale. "They're trying to destroy the evidence," she whispered. I clenched my jaw. "They're trying to scare us." But I wasn't going to back down. If Gregory and his people thought they could intimidate me into silence, they were dead wrong. The secret witness. That's when he showed up, a man in his late 50s, salt and pepper hair, eyes filled with regret. He knocked on my door at midnight. "My name is Thomas Wade," he said. "And I used to work for Gregory." Sarah gasped. I stepped forward, narrowing my eyes. "Why are you here?" Wade sighed. "Because I know where the real money is hidden, and I know who's still covering for Gregory." I froze. This wasn't over. Not even close. And if Wade was telling the truth, we were about to bring down something even bigger. The deeper conspiracy. The next morning, Wade sat at my kitchen table. He took a deep breath. "You don't understand how deep this goes," he said. I leaned forward. "Then explain it to me." He swallowed hard. "The HOA scam? That was just a front." Sarah's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Wade exhaled. "Gregory wasn't just running an illegal HOA. He looked at me, his expression grave. He was laundering money, millions of dollars, through fake property sales and HOA fees. I felt my pulse spike. This was bigger than I ever imagined. A dangerous road. Ahead. If Wade was right, then Gregory's operation wasn't just about scamming homeowners. It was part of a massive financial crime network. And the people involved would do anything to keep it quiet. Sarah grabbed my hand. "This isn't just about us anymore," she murmured. I nodded. "We have to finish this." Wade nodded. "If you're in," he said, "then I know exactly where we need to go next." I inhaled deeply. The battle wasn't over, in fact. It was only just beginning. I should have known Gregory wouldn't go down alone. The deeper I dug, the more dangerous it got. And now, with Wade sitting at my kitchen table, revealing a far bigger crime than I ever imagined, I realized we were in way over our heads. The hidden accounts, Wade pulled a USB drive from his pocket. "I made copies of everything before I left," he said. I took it, plugging it into my laptop. Files popped up. Bank transactions, property deeds, names, a list of fake homeowners, shell identities used to funnel HOA money into private accounts. And there at the top of the list, not just Gregory, but city officials, lawyers, developers, even a judge. Sarah covered her mouth. This isn't just an HOA scam, she whispered. I nodded. This is an entire network. The late-night intruder. That night I couldn't sleep. The weight of everything was crushing me. So I sat in my office, poring over the files, trying to find the one weak link we could exploit. Then I heard it. A creak outside my window. My heart slammed into my ribs. I reached for the bat under my desk, moved slowly, carefully, and then crash! The glass shattered. I spun around just in time to see a dark figure lunging toward me. I swung the bat hard, connecting with something solid. The intruder grunted and stumbled back. For a split second, the moonlight caught his face, and my blood turned to ice. I knew him. A familiar face. It was Mark Bellinger, Gregory's old right-hand man, the same guy who used to harass homeowners into paying illegal fees. Now, he was breaking into my house. I raised the bat again. Give me one reason I shouldn't knock you out cold, I growled. Bellinger held up his hands. Wait, I'm not here to fight. Could have fooled me, I shot back. He wiped blood from his mouth. I came to warn you. I narrowed my eyes. Warn me about what? He swallowed hard. Gregory, he's not the one in charge. The real mastermind. I froze. What do you mean? Bellinger exhaled shakily. Gregory was just a puppet. My grip on the bat tightened. If he wasn't in charge, then who was? Bellinger's gaze darted toward the shattered window. I don't know their real name, he admitted, but they call them the broker. Sarah's voice came from behind me. The broker? She repeated, stepping into the room. Bellinger nodded. They're the one who orchestrated everything. The fake deeds, the money laundering, the rigged elections, everything. And now that you've exposed Gregory, they're coming for you. A chill ran down my spine. A race against time. I turned back to my laptop. Files upon files of evidence, names, transactions. But one thing was missing. The broker's real identity. We need to find them before they find us, I said. Bellinger shook his head. You don't understand, he said. You don't find the broker. They find you. I stared at him, my pulse pounding. Then we need to make sure we're ready. A dangerous plan. By the next morning, we had a strategy. We were going to set a trap, expose the broker's network publicly, force them into the light. But there was one problem. If we failed, we wouldn't just lose the case, we'd lose everything, including our lives. And something told me they were already watching. I always thought the HOA was just a neighborhood nuisance, a petty group of control freaks enforcing ridiculous rules. I never imagined it would lead me here, facing a shadowy figure known only as the broker. And now, after months of battling corruption, deception, and threats, it all came down to this. The final setup. We needed a bait big enough to draw the broker out. So we leaked fake information. We made it seem like we'd discovered their real identity. Sarah used an encrypted email to send an anonymous message to Gregory's old contacts. We have everything. The broker's name, the transactions, the secret accounts. Meet us at 10 p.m. tonight or it all goes to the press. It was a bluff, but we needed them to believe it, because if they showed up, we'd finally have proof of who was really pulling the strings. The meeting place. We chose an abandoned construction site, an unfinished luxury development meant to be the next HOA gold mine. Only, it had been sitting empty for months after the scandal broke. The perfect place for a trap. At 9:50 p.m., I stood in the shadows, my pulse pounding. Sarah was nearby, hidden with a camera rolling. Wade had his laptop ready to live stream if things got ugly. And Bellinger? He was supposed to be our inside man. He'd arranged the meeting, said the broker would come alone, but something about it felt off. Then we saw headlights. A sleek black SUV pulled into the lot, its tinted windows gleaming under the floodlights. The engine cut, the door opened, and out stepped, not one person, but three, the true power players. The first was a man in a tailored gray suit, James Holloway, the city commissioner. The second, a woman in a sharp navy dress, Lillian Marsh, a senior judge. And the third, an older man with silver hair, stepping out with the confidence of a king. I recognized him instantly. Walter Langston, one of the biggest real estate developers in the entire state. And judging by the way the other two deferred to him, the broker wasn't just one person. It was a partnership. Langston smirked. "I assume you're the one causing all this trouble," he said. I forced myself to stay calm. "You stole millions from homeowners," I said. "You used the HOA to funnel money, rig elections, and force people off their land." Langston sighed, shaking his head. "You really don't understand how the world works, do you?" I clenched my fists. "I understand just fine. And so does the public. In 5 minutes, everything we have goes live." His smirk disappeared. Lillian Marsh stepped forward. "You have no idea the kind of people you're dealing with," she said coldly. "Walk away now and we'll forget this ever happened." I let out a short laugh. "And if I don't?" Langston's eyes darkened. "You'll regret it." The trap closes. I took a slow step forward. "Funny thing about secrets," I said. "They don't stay buried forever." Langston's face barely flickered, until I pointed above his head, to the drone camera hovering silently in the sky, broadcasting everything, live, to thousands of people, their conversation, their threats, their identities, the entire truth. Langston's eyes darted to Holloway, to Marsh, to the SUV. They knew. It was over. The end of the broker. Within hours, the footage had spread everywhere. The FBI launched an official investigation. Holloway and Marsh were arrested. Langston tried to run, but the evidence was too overwhelming. He was charged with fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Every corrupted HOA in the state was audited. Homeowners who had been robbed of their land finally got justice. And Gregory? He turned state's witness, selling out everyone in exchange for a reduced sentence. As for Sarah, Wade, and me, we finally breathed again. For the first time in months, we weren't looking over our shoulders, because we had won. One last look. Weeks later, I stood at the edge of what was once supposed to be Pine Ridge Estates. The land was being restored, turned into something real, a community center, a public park, not another soulless, greed-fueled HOA development. Sarah took my hand. "I think he'd be proud," she said softly. I nodded, looking up at the sky. Grandpa had fought to protect this land his whole life, and even though it had taken everything, even though we had nearly lost it all, we finished the fight for him. Because some things are worth fighting for. And no one gets to steal a home from the people who built it.